All right, gang. Thanks for joining me tonight. This is Benji Portnoy in beautiful sunny Austin, Texas. It's a balmy 33 degrees outside, which is actually pretty good for Texas. It gets not very cold here most of the time. And it's funny, this is a webinar about overcoming fear, and most of the people here are afraid of cold weather and snow and ice, which is funny too because I'm afraid of everything that's the opposite. So let's get started. Hope you're having a great night, and thanks so much for joining me here. This is all about overcoming fear. This is the 7 steps to overcoming fear. And as we jump right in here, I'll tell you a little bit about me, but in a couple of minutes. I want to jump right in and get started here right off the bat with a Jim Carrey quote. He gave this at, I believe it was the Maharishi University graduation like a year ago, probably not even that long. And this is what he said. It really resounded with me. He said, "So many of us choose our path out of fear, disguised as practicality. What we really want seems impossibly out of reach and ridiculous to expect, so we never dare to ask the universe for it. My father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe that was possible for him, so he made a conservative choice. Instead, he got a quote-unquote safe job as an accountant, and when I was 12 years old, he was let go from that safe job, and our family had to do whatever we could to survive. I learned many great lessons from my father, not the least of which was that you can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on doing what you love." And with that, I want to ask the question, and that's, again, what this is all about. And I am somebody who really believes that you go after what you want in life, and the fear is secondary. But, of course, the case. We're all afraid of something. I mean, a lot of people skydiving, obviously this person here. My question is, how'd they take that picture? That I'm not sure of. So many people are afraid of public speaking. Some people, a lot of people, in fact, would rather die than public. Maybe something else. There's a classic example of something to be afraid of. That was Britney Spears, by the way. And yes, I did add those eyes. So my question is, what scares you? Before we get into that, we'll talk about what scared or scarred. When I was about 7 years old, this is where it all kind of started for me, and I'll explain why. When I was about 7 years old, my dad and I were home on a Saturday afternoon. My mom had gone out shopping, and he and I, when we had a weekend to ourselves, would watch a movie. And back then, there were all kinds of different movies to watch. This was the late 70s. Actually, 7 years old, it was the early 80s, so it was probably E.T., and all kinds of, the Goonies was probably coming out in a couple of years. But my dad asked me about if I wanted to see another movie, and that movie was called Jaws. And Jaws obviously was the start of a lot of fear, a lot of young people home on Saturday afternoons. So we started watching it, and about an hour and a half later, my dad looked around and he couldn't find me because I was behind the couch, curled up in the fetal position, and it just was terrifying to me. But what this did was it spurred not only the fear, but a real fascination about sharks. I mean, here was this predator that was the most dangerous thing in the whole world, but there was, which in this form was the protagonist, Chief Brooks, was able to defeat that. So I started learning a lot about sharks. I was 7 years old. I just dug right in, and over the next, I'm 37 now, so over the next 30 years, I've spent dozens, if not hundreds of hours watching films about sharks, reading about sharks, and just learning about what they really are. And what they are is they're animals. And they're not inherently scary. They just are what they are. And so I started learning more about how these people dive with them. These divers go down into the ocean and tiger sharks, bull sharks, great white sharks, they will literally just be out there without a cage and be diving with them. And through this experience, they have discovered something called immobility. And what this means is basically the shark is coming towards you, and sharks naturally are not, by the way, this is not all about sharks, we're just starting here, that sharks are not naturally aggressive for no reason. They're inherently curious, and so when there's this diver down there, the shark might come by to investigate, and the diver, if he or she can position his or her hands on the face or on the side of the snout of the shark in a certain way and for a certain amount of time, it actually takes the shark into essentially a trance. And when I learned this, you can see from the picture, it's amazing. I mean, that's got to be a 15-foot, I believe it's a tiger shark, and there's this diver just down on his knees like it's a little kitten. When I saw this picture and when I started learning about tonic immobility, it was incredible to me that the skill to turn it into, I don't want to say under your control, but that's essentially what it is, that you can conquer your own fear to the point of being able to make something so scary completely docile. And so that's what started it for me. Let's back up a little bit. About me, when I was like here in really big inexplicable ways, I started getting these panic attacks out of nowhere. I'd just gotten into junior high. I remember being in science class, and just out of nowhere, this terror crept up on me, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I was sitting there. The teacher I was in Mrs. Rich's class. She was talking, and it had nothing to do with her. It had of extreme discomfort, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so finally it got to the point where it was so bad I literally had to walk out of class. I just left, and I went to the guidance and wound up sitting there. I think I called my dad. He tried to help, told me down from 100 to 0 just to sort of put my mind somewhere else, and nothing worked. And so I had been in there. This had happened probably for 2 or 3 weeks, and eventually my parents realized, okay, we can't just keep letting him leave class. We need to do something about this. And so for the first time, I went to a therapist. I actually went to, and this had nothing to do with taking drugs. It had nothing to do with any sort of like an ADD disorder or bipolar disorder. It just was what it was. Coping mechanisms. I started learning through all of these different things, whether it was going to talk to Dr. Steve or going and watching, learning about sharks. I learned that you could really control your own fears. And I started to do that. I practiced and I practiced. And these are techniques both emotionally, mentally, and as well physiologically, ways to calm yourself down, to stop looking at what you're afraid of and just be in the present and keep moving forward towards what you really want. And so since then, I have worked in various capacities with several Fortune 500 companies, Dell and H&R Block and Alcon, all kinds of different companies. I've started my own couple of very successful businesses. I'm a professional. I've been all over the country playing stage in front of 3,000 people at a time. I play the drums, but I actually have been up in front of the stage with the microphone in front of that many people at once. And yes, it's scary, but it's awesome. It's so much fun. And I've also more recently written and published my own book called Taming a Shark. And this is what a lot of what you're going to hear tonight is what I put in the book. And so if you're interested in that, we can talk about that later. But in the meantime, for the next 60 minutes, I'm not here to leading up to a bigger player. I just wanted to share some with you. So we're going to do several things. We're going to explore fear as a concept. We're going to talk about where it comes from. We're going to talk about how to identify it, because sometimes you're afraid of things and you don't even realize it. It's sort of there under the surface. Help show you where to find it, and then once you know it's there, you can start to overcome it. And not only how to overcome it, but reasons why you should overcome it and how your life can change as a result. Because sometimes we can be in a place where we feel stable, we feel status quo, everything's okay, but as we're going to get into a little later, that when you're happy or that your life is what you want it to be. I'm going to introduce you to some very inspiring people who have overcome the odds, who have overcome their own fears, and we're also going to talk about what you can do to motivate yourself and take action to get what scares you but what excites you in life. And just off the bat, you may or may not have heard this before, but fear and excitement are the same neurological paths. And sometimes when you're excited about something, it's physiologically sometimes the same thing as there are three types of fear. Now, this is coming. I've gone through a lot of different types of fear. I've talked to a lot of different types of people, and I've basically been able to narrow these down into three separate categories, all kind of related. The first one is physical. You're worried about mortality. You're worried about getting hurt, feeling pain, or some sort of physical harm befalling you. This is worried about you're worried about getting shot or stabbed or killed, raped. Any of that category all goes under physical fear, and your essentially is what it comes down to. The next one is social. You're afraid, all of us, we're afraid of being laughed at. We're afraid of getting embarrassed. There's a reason for this. Obviously, there's the on top you feel that feeling of being embarrassed. And a lot of people don't like that because they don't want to feel that embarrassment. But if you look at us, we're animals and we have of time. And back several tens of thousands of years, we existed in tribes, essentially. And you know this. It's back in the caveman days. It's back in the days when we used to, hunt and fish and gather. And this was, it was a very different time, because now, if you don't eat for a day, you can just go to McDonald's or wherever you go and get a burger or some fries, and then, it doesn't cost very much, and you don't have to worry about getting fed. And, most of the time, we're pretty safe. We're going to talk about that a little later. You don't have to worry about turning a corner, and there's a saber-toothed tiger ready to have you for dinner. What happened? And so if you were, for some reason, not higher up in the echelon of the tribe, you have a lower social standing, there's always the risk. Or let's say you do something to just make it so nobody wants you in the tribe anymore. The word's not coming to mind, but basically you get kicked out of the tribe, and then you could be alone, isolated and alone. You have nobody to help you stay alive, and that's when you're immune to all these elements. And so there is a very strong evolutionary push to have friends, to be social. Aside from all the positive benefits we get, we're trying to avoid this sort of antiquated sense of fear of we're going to be left alone and die as a result. And so finally, and again, that has to do with third fear, economic fear, and that's not having enough money. When you run out of money, it's kind of the same thing. It's your own need of what Maslow calls your bottom level needs. Your I forget what he calls it actually, but if you were looking at Maslow's hierarchy, these are your core needs on the bottom of the triangle. And so this actually happened to me once. I had a fear for years that if I weren't able, then I'd get my electricity shut off, or I'd, it'd be these horrible things. I'd get evicted. I actually know somebody. He calls himself. He's a kind of a friend of mine, George Carroll. He calls himself the homeless motivational speaker, and he, on purpose, went homeless for several months. He got rid of everything he owned. He had maybe a suitcase or two, and just saw what it was like to live with nothing. And I had a similar experience to this. And at the time, it had not taken off yet. And so the money I had saved and socked away was running low, and I was trying to conserve it as best as possible. And one day I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was freezing cold. This was the middle of winter. And the electricity had been shut off, and I did not know what to do. I had never been in that situation before, but as you'll see later, we find ways to get ourselves through this. There's endless stories of people who never thought they'd be able to survive these kinds of events, and you would be completely shocked at what happens. By the way, if you hear something in the background, Rex, our fearless cat, is trying to get me to play with his toys with him, and obviously so anyway, that's what you're hearing in the background. Rex is not afraid of much, by the way. So, of course, the brain's number one goal, what is it? It's keeping you alive. And times it's up not as a way to keep you afraid, but to keep you afraid so you stay alive. Because we tell ourselves to be afraid of something so we don't die. Again, that's kind of Maslow kicking in here. Our number one push in our lives and in our brains is self-preservation. So when you break it down, fear is you trying to protect yourself and keep yourself alive. One of my favorite coaches who I listen to, his name's Coach Sean Smith, and if you're interested, you can find him on YouTube. He calls this the Border Patrol. Essentially, this is the idea that you have set up, we're going to talk about this in a minute, that you have what some people call a comfort zone. And a comfort zone is the things you know about, you feel okay doing. Maybe it's a circle of friends, maybe it's certain activities, maybe it's doing certain types of jobs and never going outside of that because it's unfamiliar. And so the Border Patrol, what they do, and this is all imaginary in your head, essentially is keep you safe by not letting you go outside of that border. And this is a screenshot from the TV show that was on for about a season a couple of years ago. It was called Terra Nova. And this was a story about, it was set in 2050, I believe it was, and these people had totally depleted the Earth's resources, and they wound up finding a way to kind of teleport back, time travel back 100 million years ago, back when there were dinosaurs. And they created here what was called the colony, and inside the colony they were safe. This is what I visualize every time I think of a comfort zone, or when Sean was talking about a border patrol, because outside of those borders you have some pretty scary stuff. There were dinosaurs, there were all kinds of things that were just waiting to kill you. Now this is what we imagine, this is what we imagine as far as our comfort zone, that we're safe in that region. But ultimately, you're never truly safe and you're never truly unsafe. everybody is immune to the elements. We just convince ourselves we're safe because of what I call not the common, but the safe and familiar zone. And what we're talking about here is what you want you're not familiar with. And this isn't true for everything, but you want to ask your boss for a raise, but you're afraid that you've done that before. You don't know what it would be like. Or even more so, let's say you've always wanted to start a business. You've wanted to start a restaurant, or you've wanted to just go out as a consultant, or whatever, that it's unfamiliar. There are going to be challenges you've never had to face before, and so it's scary. But what you want is not on your side of the fence that's protected by that border patrol. And so I don't call it a comfort zone. I call it a safe and familiar zone, because when you're able to familiarize yourself with one side of that, that zone grows, and you can grow that over the course of your entire life. Now, what's on the other side of that fence is almost never as bad as you think of it it is, and if it is as bad, more than not, 9.5 times out of 10, you can handle it without any problems. Now, there's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later in even more detail. But there's a concept I'd like to become familiar with, and that's called the initiation period. Now, this is a term. There are other terms for it, but this is a term I came up with. And it's basically that period of being outside your comfort zone before it, or your safe and familiar zone, before it becomes safe and familiar. And so when you're being initiated to that, that's when you have to just feel that discomfort and deal with it. So let's get right in. The title of this webinar is 7 Steps. Let's get into the 7 steps of overcoming any fear. Now, the first one I want to tell you about is understanding the path that fear takes in the brain. And we're going to get into a little bit of science here. I promise it's going to be worth it here in a second. So there are 2 paths that fear takes in the brain. The first one is called the low road. The second one is called the high road. These were, especially the high road, were developed and termed by a neuro researcher, a brain researcher, named Dr. Joseph Ledoux, L-E-D-O-U-X. And some of the stuff that's out there about this is very technical, it's very academic, and we're going to keep it really simple here. But if you'd like to learn more about it, he's the guy who basically wrote the book on this, literally. So the low road fear response starts with a thing called the thalamus. And what that does, it's the scout it's always watching. It's kind of like that border patrol in a sense, that it's always watching, it's observing and taking in information. It then puts that information, it sends it to what's called the amygdala. It receives that information, it turns it into a response which helps decide what you're going to do about it. Is there really a threat here? And if there is, the hypothalamus, which you can see there are all of those on the right side in the brain, the hypothalamus is sort of that light switch that gets turned on when you realize there's danger. It sends you into fight or flight, and if you, most people have heard of fight or flight. If you've never heard of it before, basically it's what people call being a deer in the headlights. You either sit there and decide to stand your ground and fight against something if there's a threat, or you run away. And the hypothalamus takes care of that. And so basically, or helps you trigger that and decide that. And so let's put this into real life terms. Let's say you're sitting at home, one really loud knock, and so low road fear response. It starts in the thalamus, it goes up to the amygdala, and by the time immediately it hits that hypothalamus, you think to yourself, oh my God, there's this horrible thing on the other side of the door. By the way, that's the scariest picture I could find. And I went to bed this night with that in my brain. I didn't get a whole lot of sleep. So imagine is on the other side of the door, or whatever is going on. Maybe you're afraid of, I don't know, some people are afraid of elephants or lemurs or, again, Britney Spears. Whatever it is, without having any sort of sense of what is going on, you've been triggered to have that fight or flight response. So let's talk about something else, and let's get that scary clown guy off the screen. I'm sorry if you can't sleep tonight, but now you'll know why. So let's talk about the high road fear response. You have the first three. You have the thalamus involved, the amygdala, and then it goes through the hypothalamus. But something else that gets involved. Now this is the hippocampus, and what it's responsible for is storing and receiving messages, is because it establishes context for what's going on. So what that means is if you hear that loud knock at the door, what happens is you go back and you think in your memory banks, is there a reason for this? Is this happening because of something? And maybe there's something else to explain it. And so, you hear that knock and you realize it's Saturday at 4 o'clock and Amazon that today my by the bell box that is supposed to get here. And so that's what the hippocampus is for. And by the way, just in case you didn't, the human body's response to fear and anxiety or even stress, it's exactly the same whether that threat, whether the thing that's the stimulus for you is real or if you're just imagining it. And so that's why the scary clown guy feels so real, and that's why it triggers the same feelings. And the point in telling you all of this is sometimes we get that fear triggered and there's no real reason behind it because we haven't taken, or not that there's no reason, but we haven't taken the time to check it against what could really be happening and what the situation might actually be. And so take it, let's say, if you are going to start a business, let's say you've thought about it, or you're going to, let's do a different one. Let's say you're thinking about walking across a room. If you're single, you're going to walk across a room and talk to somebody. Let's say you're in a coffee shop, and this is something you're not comfortable doing. Most people aren't comfortable walking up to strangers because we worry about how we're going to look. Is everybody going to stare at us? Is everybody thinking we're stupid or ridiculous? And if you're walking up to ask somebody, talk to them, have a conversation, ask them for their phone number, you're automatically, when you get afraid, you're imagining in the future what could happen. And so maybe this is your first time doing it. You're imagining that this person's going to laugh at you, that they're going to laugh straight in the face, or they're going to scream at you, and everybody in the room is going to look up. But what realistically, if we check that against the context of the situation, and we're using that hippocampus, you look at what the reality probably is. You walk up to that person and you start talking with them, and maybe it goes well, maybe it doesn't, but it's probably not going to be nearly as bad as you think it's going to be. And so when you're in a situation like that, stop and put a little context. Step number 2, I call this meet your monsters. And what this is, well, before we hit meeting your monsters is basically, let's kind of look at some of the things that induce fear, And so when you're growing up, and even when you're an adult, you have friends, and these people, if they're good family and good friends, inevitably they care about you and they worry that some harm could befall you. And so these, when I was growing up, I had, again, my dad used to, there was one day, and I talk more about this in my book, one day where I went out, I was probably, 5, 6 years old, they were taking a nap, I went outside to get the mail, and I had never done that before. I came back in, my dad was there, that was the only day I had ever gotten a spanking because he was so upset. He said, "Do you know who's out there? There are people who could kill you and kidnap you," probably not in that order, but people who could really hurt you. Now, if you keep thinking about it, I fast forward probably 15, 20 years from there, and I talked a minute ago about opening a restaurant. I had expressed an interest in that, And I told my grandma about that one day, and my grandma is somebody who's very conservative, again, another family member who really cares about me. She said, oh, you don't want to do that. Something like 70% of all restaurants fail in the first year. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's absolutely true, but what about the other 30%? Or maybe it's 90% and 10%, whatever it is. People who are your family and your friends who care about you are looking out for what they consider to be your best interests. That doesn't mean it's what's best for you overall. So that's family and friends. Let's talk a little bit, and there's more to it. You know, if you to friendships, everybody has their own dynamics, their own filters, and we could have a whole webinar just on that, but we're not going to this one to a good, tight, solid hour. So let's talk about some societal factors. First of all, a really big one is the news. And you see this all the time. You tune in to the 5 or the 6 or the 9 or the 10 o'clock news. You read magazines, you read newspapers, and all the time you see these stories and you hear these stories about who got shot that day. And this happens more often on the 5 and 6 o'clock news than anywhere else, at least in my opinion. All the things that could kill you in the whole world, and especially in your city. And I found this screen, and this was from CNN, which is should be a reputable news source. And there are two things, Ebola and ISIS. And I just thought, okay, here are the things that are scaring me, or not me, but scaring people in our country the most right now, terrorism and diseases that could be this horrible outbreak, and are these really things that you should be concerned about? Well, maybe, but is it something we need to be covering on the news all the time? Probably not. And why are they showing it all the time? Well, it makes sense. If they have your attention, which they get by telling you you are in danger, you're going to keep watching. And so when you don't feel like you're in danger and everything's good, you're probably not going to watch as much. You know, you're not going to tune in to see what kind of coffee Joe made at his house this morning. Joe's made up, by the way. So there's actually, there was a study done in an article reported in Psychology Today. The study was done that reported that news stations air up to 17 negative news reports for every one good one, which it just blew me away to hear that, because, I mean, why do we need so much bad news? And so when you see this over and over again, you become programmed to believe, wow, I'm really in danger. So this came into play for me. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. And if you followed the news as far as that goes, several years we've been named at least in the top 5, if not the 1 or 2 slot of the number of homicides. You'd think, people ask me about that who have never been to St. Louis, and they think of Missouri as either you're dealing with cows or you're dealing with people who are going to shoot you, neither of which is true most of the time, especially in St. Louis. I've never seen a cow in St. Louis. And so as far as this #1 murder capital thing, if you saw that on the news or you read it in a newspaper, you would think, I don't want to go there, I'm going to get shot. But I'm here to tell you that I grew up there. I went to places that people said you probably shouldn't go, and I was fine. I know people who live in some of these places, some of these streets. Now, do you want to walk down the street in some of these places holding a wad of cash and you know, throwing your car keys to your BMW around? Probably not. But it's not what they make it out to be. And so keep that in mind as you're watching the news, as you're reading the paper. What's their real motivation? And in some ways, if you look at things like these, how are you being manipulated? How are these people trying to control you in one way or another? And that's not to sound too punk. Okay, let's keep moving. Another one is marketing and advertising, and you know this very well. It's more fear-mongering. And it's just these very powerful images and videos of basically trying to convince you to spend money with them because you could get hurt or die, and invoke fear as a tactic. So, I mean, what it comes down to is the longer these organizations have your eyes and your ears, like we talked about, the more likely it is you're going to keep watching or you're going to do something about it. You're going to be aware of what people are trying to do, what some of these news organizations and these advertisers are trying to do, and recognize it. When you're watching commercials on TV, you might step back and say, well, what is that Cheetos commercial really trying to do? Or what is this anti-smoking commercial? Well, that one's actually probably pretty good, but you get the idea. Okay, step number 3, stop playing the victim. So we're going to do a little story here. Now, these people are made up, but these are people who could very easily be in your life. So sometimes we are our very own worst enemies. We don't realize that if we accept for what happens to us, that in itself can have the power to change our lives. So this story is about 2 people, again, made up, named Jack and Natalie. Jack was a car salesman, a lot of multiple 6-figure salary. He dressed nicely. He wore expensive jewelry, and he and Natalie went out to dinner all the time, and he bossed people around. He was kind of a jerk. He felt like they were his own hired help. He did this at work, too. He just was loud and aggressive, and one day his boss called him into the office and said they were getting complaints about him, and they were tired of it, so they were letting him go. He wasn't a fit for the company. Jack sped home. He was raging. He said, Natalie, I can't believe this. That place is going to fall apart without me. Those that take a strong personality, and they'll regret it. And so he just didn't know what to do with it, but he just kept blaming them. He started searching for a new job, but he didn't search very hard. He figured, you know what, I'm good enough. They're going to hire me back, and if not, I'm sure somebody's going to come calling after me. And so he did that, and for half the day, and then he just went to the bar and had some drinks. And Natalie, of course, bought into it and thought, well, we're going to be making money again soon. We have a little bit put away. She kept buying nice clothes. They kept going out to dinner and acting like nothing had changed. Now, a couple of months wore on, and Jack still had not found a new job. He was spending more and more time at that bar. Their savings was going away, and he was still blaming his boss. He was blaming the customers. He blamed everybody, and he didn't take responsibility for what had happened to him. In the meantime, his wife, Natalie, started to sweat. For the first time in her life, she was feeling desperate. She was unprepared. She didn't know how to handle this, and she was no longer confident everything was going to be okay, really scared. And so what she did was she called her mom for help. She called her one day out of the blue and said, Mom, we're running out of money, and I am so scared. Can you help us? And so Natalie's mom offered to help with the bills for a few months while Jack started to look for a new job. And so they started feeling a little bit safer, a little bit more secure. But that didn't change how Jack felt. He kept drinking, and he was still angry, and he was still blaming everybody. A couple of months later, Natalie's mom called to see how Jack was doing and finding a job. And Natalie said, well, he's trying, but nobody really appreciates him. And we're convinced it's still going to be a couple of months. And so Natalie's mom, of course, was no fool. She could sense what was really going on here, that nothing had changed, that neither one of them, Jack nor Natalie, had accepted what had happened to them and had accepted responsibility for the situation. And Natalie's mom cut off that help. They were so angry with her. They said, that's outrageous. You're abandoning us. You don't do that to family. And they didn't talk to her for months. They kept blaming her. They said, you're responsible for what's happening to us right now. We have to take a second mortgage out on the house. We have to do all these terrible things. They got angrier and angrier. You get the idea. And this turned into a cycle. They realized she realized this wasn't going to end, and it just went on and on. So I have that story in a longer version in the book, but basically what this is all about is that we all have times in our lives where we feel a sense of desperation and that we've been maybe somebody else, and that's okay. But when you spend your life focusing on how other people have wronged you, you're never going to accept responsibility for the situation. That's called having a victim mentality. Again, a victim playing the victim. We all do it to some degree. Most of us, anyway. The people who tend to be the most successful in life are the ones who never do this. The people who never do this are the ones who always say, what has happened to me in the past? I am responsible for what's happening to me right now, how I'm interpreting what's going on in my life, and what I'm going to do with it. And I'm not going to blame anybody. Even if somebody did me wrong, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make things happen. Only when you accept the reality of what has, is, and will happen to you are you going to realize that you're the only one with the power to change it. And then, and only then, will you be able to create the change that you want for yourself. So I want to tell you about some people who have really inspired me when it comes to this kind of thinking. The first one, there's a movie out there called Murder Ball, and it is about this group of, I believe it's all men, and these are all men who are have either been in accidents or they were born without the use of their legs, and in some other parts of their body, they're paraplegics. But what they actually are able, they play what's called murder ball. They go and get in these wheelchairs, or they're in the wheelchairs all the time, and they play these very aggressive sports with each other. And it's incredible because it's not like, you know, for lack of a better example, it's not the Special Olympics where they actually are aggressive. They have fans who come watch them. People get really, really into this. They have groupies, and it's really impressive. Where some people, if let's say they're in a car wreck and they lose use of their legs, they decide, well, life's over, I can't do anything, and they feel sorry for themselves. You might know people who, maybe not to that degree, but they consider themselves handicapped. These people do not. So Murder Ball, check it out. Check it out. I'm going to take a drink of water. So the next person I want to tell you is someone named Lizzie Velasquez. Lizzie is somebody who was actually born in 1989 with a syndrome that prevents her from gaining weight. She literally has 0% body fat, and you can see she looks a little different than what you're used to looking at when it comes to people. And she's one of, I mean, it's extremely rare. There are only 3 people in the world who have this. And when she was 17 years old, she saw herself on a YouTube video, and the title of the video was "The World's Ugliest Woman." That's not bad enough. One of the comments on the video, this was on YouTube, said, "Do the world a favor and put a gun to your head." Now imagine if you had grown up looking like this, having what is probably a very painful condition that affects you everywhere you go and in everything you do. And to top it all off, if you look at this picture of her right eye, from our perspective, she's totally blind in it. And so she has all these odds stacked against her. What she has done is gone on, she took all of this and has gone on to write books. She's become an author and spoken out as a motivational speaker against bullying, because she's been bullied as a result of how she's different. She's even given a TED Talk. If you're familiar with TED Talks, these are literally world-class talks that people can, I think to go to a TED conference, it's like $7,500 for a ticket, something like that. And she has spoken, I believe, at a TED Talk, if not a TEDx talk. And so on top of it all, she actually started her own Kickstarter campaign because of the Legacy Project. She wanted to have her own documentary about her life and how she has overcome bullying. And she wanted to raise $200,000 to do it. You can see here she raised $215,000, 120% of her goal. And she has inspired millions and millions of people. She said when somebody asked her, what motivates you? Why do you do this? She said, taking shelter in my tears or of my tears, I chose to be happy. She chose to be happy. We don't always think we have that as a choice. But she said, I realize the syndrome is not a problem, but a blessing that allows me to improve myself and inspire other people. Another one is Zach Anner. Zach is, I love Zach, actually. Never met the guy, even though he's based out of Austin, Texas. He has cerebral palsy, and he got the attention of the world when Oprah Winfrey was having a search for the next TV star. And Zach was kind of hooked in with some guys who were into producing videos. In fact, I think he worked in one of these studios, but he decided, and I think his friends probably pushed him to do it a little bit. You can see he's in a wheelchair, and he's a little different. If you watch him and you listen to him, he's a little bit off from what you're used to. He submitted an audition tape to Oprah Winfrey. Not only did he get to be a finalist, but I'm pretty sure he won his own show. It was called Rollin' with Zach. It wasn't on for very long, but he got a lot of fans as a result. He won $100,000. He got a new car, and he got celebrity support. This is him with John Mayer. I think John Mayer wrote a song about him, and all kinds of other people were very relevant. Okay, so let's talk to stop if you have these tendencies, and sometimes it's not as bad as that story of Jack and Natalie, but we tell ourselves that we're not to blame for something or that it's responsibility. We also tend to talk ourselves down. We tend to put ourselves down. What I recommend you start doing, some people call this affirmations, but it's a little more specialized, what I'm going to describe. I have a friend named George for a few years, wonderful guy. He's made a lot of money for not only his clients, but himself. And I said, what's your secret? He said, he even writes down, but he definitely reads his goals and envisions them every single day. And I thought a great practice to start, and so I did. And I put together a document on my computer called Life Optimization. And with it, we'll come back to that in a second. It was basically all the things I wanted to accomplish for myself, both in the near future and long term. And so this is something I've started doing every day, and I've done it for probably the last 2-3 years, and I've slowly checked these things off the list. It was me paying off debt, me going to Europe and getting married, and my wife and I got married and went to Europe, and we had a great time, and those are dreams of mine that I had always had. We actually went to Italy and we went to Greece, and one of my biggest fears at the time was, how are we going to get around? We barely speak either language, and we did it. And that was just part of, again, opening up your safe and familiar zone. So doing this, it's not just writing these things down, but how you phrase them. Tony Robbins says that your brain is essentially like a computer. He calls it a servo mechanism. And so you might say to yourself, if you have the desire to lose weight, you might say to yourself, I don't want to be fat anymore. And then you say it to yourself every day for a month because you think you're doing the right thing. I don't want to be fat anymore. I don't want to be fat anymore. Congratulations, you have achieved exactly nothing. You've told your brain, remember, your brain's like a computer, you've told it what you don't want, but you haven't told it what you do want. And so let's keep going. Maybe there's another way to do it. Then I want to be thin. Well, that's good. That's a step in the right direction, but you're training your brain to desire something that is out of reach. You want it. That doesn't mean you have it. So let's look at another way. We've started here with a couple ways that aren't optimal, but to really put yourself in the mind of somebody who has what you want instead of I want to be healthy, that instead you say I am healthy. I look terrific. I eat well. I exercise daily, and I love who I am. My body is beautiful, and I'm going to continue to bust my ass and get it looking even more slim and trim. What you're doing is, think about it. That's how how athletes basically do what they're able to do. They visualize themselves already being there. And so it's a really powerful technique. And whether you try this life optimization document or not, you're going to tell yourself something. Your brain tends to repeat what you tell it. Saying to yourself, I hate being fat. I'm so fat. I don't want to be fat anymore. Or I'm so lazy. I never go to the gym. Or whatever it is. I'm so afraid of starting a business. I will never have blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is, what you're telling yourself, your brain's going to repeat. And it's that servo mechanism. So start telling yourself things in the positive. Already put yourself in the mindset of who you want to be and describe that person to yourself, and you'll start moving towards that goal. It all starts with telling your brain what you are and not what you are not. And it's very simple. So number 4, what are you avoiding? This is what we're looking at here is a Narcotics Anonymous, basically a guidebook. And the reason it's up there is a few years ago I was interviewing somebody who went on to be a friend of mine. His name is Steve. And I was interviewing him for one of my websites. Now, Steve lived out of town a few hours, and he came to Austin probably once, twice a week. And what we arranged to do was have the interview when he was in town. And he said, you know, I'd love to do it, but I also have a meeting when I'm coming to town, and you're welcome to go with me. And when we first met up that night, he told me what it was. He said it's a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And this really threw me for a loop. I had never been to anything like this before, but I was open to it. And so I tagged along with him. We got to this, it was in a church. And we walked into the room, and it was such a foreign experience. It was actually a little scary because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what these people were going to be like. I didn't know if I really belonged there, but I was willing to do it. And so we all sat down, we went around the circle, and a couple people went, and a couple people more went, and it got around to me. And I had no idea what to say. I was not, at least in my mind, I wasn't an addict. I had never tried narcotics before. So I just said, hi, I'm Benji or Benjamin, and I'm a guest. And I talked a little bit more about why I was there and who I was, and then I stopped. And everybody said thank you, and it went on to the next person. And I looked around, and I looked at people's faces. I wanted to see what the reactions were to what I had just said. And some people were looking at me. Some people had no expression on their face. Some people were smiling. Some people weren't even looking at me in the eye. They just were looking away. But there was something, as I looked at all those faces, there was a sense of recognition. there was a sense of, we kind of know who you are without you saying exactly who you are. And I didn't get it at the time. But the more I heard people talk about their situations and their struggles with addiction to narcotics, I identified with it. There was something about it that became familiar. And when we left, and over the next few days and next few weeks, I realized parts of my personality that when I had anxiety, or when I was stressed out, or just things weren't going right, I had tendencies that were basically addictive. And it went beyond that. I realized that there were things I did in my life to that were not healthy, but they felt good. And this got me to thinking, what is causing this? Now, as I kind of went on in life, um, I learned about different kinds of neurochemicals that affect your brain. One of them is called dopamine. And if you've not heard of dopamine before, it's basically the pleasure chemical. This is a guy named Simon Sinek, and he is one of my speakers. He's not like a motivational speaker per se, but he talks about all kinds of, how we relate to each other, especially as we become more and more disconnected. So what he talks about, and what I started learning about, is how dopamine is, it's this neurochemical cocktail that makes you feel good. And in his book, Leaders Eat Last, and in some of it, you can look him up on YouTube, it's Simon, S-I-N-E-K, Sinek. We started doing things as we became, more and more entitled, for lack of a better word, to give ourselves, we learned to kind of game the system and give ourselves shots of dopamine whenever we wanted. Well, the thing about dopamine, it's not just something that makes you feel good, it's addictive. It's addictive in the same way that drugs like cocaine and heroin are addictive. Your body physically becomes addicted to it. And so this is a big problem for me, and that's not a pun. I found this picture. I don't know this person, by the way, but I felt like what she's doing and the look on her face, there's a sense of she's giving herself, she's making herself feel good, but there's a lot of pain behind that face. It's when we eat, there are chemicals in food, and not just processed food, but whether it's sugar or oil or all kinds of different things. Cheese especially can be extraordinarily addictive, and all of these things make us feel good. And so when you overeat, or when you eat because you're stressed, and it makes you feel better, it kind of takes the edge off. People who say they're stress eating, this is the problem. They're triggering that dopamine response. Another one, and you can see I put the two things here together, is technology addiction. This is something that's come up really strongly over the last 5-10 years, and to a point where there's actually a center for it, the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction. And you can see, if you want to check it out, virtual-addiction.com. If you go to that website, you can take a quiz. And the quiz is assessing how much addiction you have to technology. And they ask these questions: do you find yourself spending more time than normal, or that you should be, on your smartphone when there are more productive, important things to do? Do you lose track of time? Do you find yourself doing this more than actually talking to real people? Do you find yourself doing this? Do you find yourself answering texts and tweets and emails at all hours of the day, and even sleeping with your phone next to the bed and picking it up? And I'm not saying I'm not guilty of some of these things, but when it's to the detriment of the rest of your life, sometimes you have to ask, why am I doing this? What am I avoiding? And it's not about stopping the behavior. It's not about putting your phone in the other room necessarily, although that might help. You have to look at what's causing me to want to pick up that phone or to eat a lot of food. Sometimes It's more about addressing a feeling that's causing it. Maybe you have something going on at work. Maybe there's a relationship problem. Maybe you have something going on with your family that you're not addressing. Sometimes it's better to not just, like we said, not just stop whatever you healthy, but to really look at what's causing it. And so that is all about what you're avoiding. So we're going to talk, and I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here because we've been on for an hour, and I don't want to keep you too long. But we're going to get into motivation here. So there are three types, at least in my mind, of motivation. The first one is conscious motivation. This is very simple. This is the most common type of motivation. This is where you tell yourself, I can do this. I can absolutely make this happen. You're motivating yourself to do whatever it is you're trying to do. You're trying to pass your driver's license test. You're trying to go up and talk to that person or ask your boss for a raise, whatever it is. That's conscious motivation. Unconscious motivation happens as a result of conscious motivation. And so I have my own version of this. A number of years ago, I had started lifting weights. And before this, I had recurring dreams. I'd never been in a fight before. And so I had recurring dreams that when I'd start to get into a fight and I would be the one who would throw the first punch, I would start putting my arm out there and it would move at just the slowest speed you can imagine. And when my fist would hit the other person, it wouldn't even hit, it would just press against the other person and almost turn to jelly. And then that other person would hit me in the face and I would get knocked out. Well, I started listening and I started noticing on my body from motivating myself with conscious motivation that I was starting to gain some muscle, and as a result, I started to gain some confidence. And so I had a dream about probably 3-4 weeks after I had started really noticing this, that I was about to get into a fight. This person was just really was trying to goad me into fighting with them, and he was cursing at me and yelling at me, and all of a sudden, without, I mean, it was light speed, I punched him and he was out. He was on the floor, virtually dead, and that's how powerful I had become. This was unconscious motivation at work, and again, it's a matter of opening up what was now safe and familiar because I felt a sense of confidence. And so last, I'm going to get into what I call movement motivation. And this is getting out of your head, not thinking about it anymore, just doing. There's an author who wrote a book several years ago, I believe, well, it's still out there. Her name is Susan Jeffers. I was going to say I believe she just passed away, but the book is still available. It's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. This book, I mean, even the title, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, that it says it all in that title, that feeling it and working through it and doing the thing you're afraid of, what you're doing is you're opening up that zone even more. You're creating this high road fear response through conditioning and establishing more and more context for yourself. And this is what's called in psychology as systematic desensitization. You're progressively exposing yourself, that sounds a little weird, but exposing your psyche to the things that scare you. And so that's movement motivation. You're motivating yourself by actually going and doing. And there's overlap in all three of those. Now that's motivation. Let's talk about action. There are three types of action that I want to talk to you about. The first one is called eventual osmosis. That's a term I came up with. It's very slow, and it's stuff like going to therapy and just being able to talk without really anyone stopping you. I mean, there's a therapist there, and maybe they help guide you, but it takes a long time. It's subtle. It's little changes over time. Now, this is if you're trying to do something, if you're trying to accomplish something, and you're talking about it, you're going to come to some good realizations, but there's a term that gets used quite a bit. It's called analysis paralysis. And that's when you're just talking about and thinking about things over and over again. And it just, you don't take a whole lot of action, even though it can be helpful in sort of getting yourself into the right state. This is what I call, this is the exact opposite. It's called massive action, and the speed is very fast. This is taking action by just leaps instead of baby steps. You're just doing. You're ignoring any pain that might show up, and it's huge. Now, this is extremely powerful, and it brings on what we talked about earlier, which was what I called the initiation period. Now, that initiation period in something that happened to me, it's that feeling of discomfort that only happens when you're first pushing yourself out of that safe and familiar zone. And this is something called Hamilton Pool. This is actually probably 20, 30 minutes outside of Austin. You can see this is a gorgeous place, and this picture was taken from an overhang. It's sort of an open-air cliff, and you can see over here to the right, there is, and when you walk here, you park all the way up behind where those trees walk down here. Some people are laying out on the beach, and some people are already in this water. Now, the people who have not gotten in the water, and let's say this is a day where it's a little bit cooler, it's not the middle of summer, that water is freezing. And where I was there, and I kind of dipped my foot in it, and I realized that it's probably in the 60s or the 70s. I mean, it doesn't sound that bad, but when you're just touching it for the first time, it's really cold. And I remember the first time I went to Hamilton Pool and felt that. And I said, all right, I want to be in that water, but I'm scared of what it's going to feel like. I don't want to feel freezing. It's really uncomfortable. I said, okay, you have a choice here. You can either go back up on the beach and sit there and drink your Kool-Aid or whatever, or you can go jump in that water, and it can hurt for a little while, but you'll get over it. And that's what I did. I jumped into the water. I felt that initiation period for about 15, 20 seconds. I was fine. It felt fine because I had kind of exposed my body into this feeling of discomfort long enough that it went away. And so what is your Hamilton Pool? What's something where you can take massive action? Now, the massive action is that if you try to do too much at once, it can lead to being overwhelmed. And that can lead you, when you're overwhelmed, sometimes you stop taking action. And that's biting off more than you can chew. So we talked about eventual osmosis because it gets into you eventually. And we talked about massive action. Now there's a hybrid of, I call that habits. Now this speed is right in the middle. It's moderate. And it's a combination of types 1 and 2. The only thing with this is that it really takes the highest level of discipline of the eventual osmosis, and you don't have the adrenaline rush and the inertia of taking massive action. But it sometimes can be the easiest in the sense that you're right in the middle and you're slow and steady. And again, it does take a long time, and you have to keep pushing yourself through kind of dull discomfort, minor discomfort. I have a friend named Katie who she wanted to lose 100 pounds, and she said, I'm going to do this the right way. And so she researched it. She talked to 5 different people who had lost 100 pounds. She researched them. She really learned about them, and she decided to take it slow and steady. And of course, over a period of several months, she was able to lose in a healthy way those 100 pounds. And she was afraid of, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this happen? She decided to take a moderate speed and stay disciplined about it, and she made it happen. And of course, there is a place for all 3. I'm not saying one is better than any of them. You will find that you probably get the most out of taking massive action because it feels really intense. You're going to have strong feelings on both the discomfort and the exciting adrenaline side of making something happen for yourself, but I encourage you to kind of explore all three. Now, let's get into our last step here, and this one is very simple. I call this the most important skill you can learn, and that's the ability to stay calm and focused and do what needs to be done. A quick story. When I moved to Texas about probably, I'd say it was about 8 or 9 years ago, I was a struggling musician, and I had found a gig with a band that I was going to sub with, and this was in a new place for me. I live in Austin, but this was in a place about 3 hours away called Concan, Texas. It was a new place, new band, and I was not sure what to expect, but I packed my drums up, I got in the car, and I drove off. I noticed as I was driving there, these were some of the smallest two-lane roads I'd ever seen, and this was probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it was nice and bright, but there was just nothing. It was just dense like forest. And so I got to the gig, I introduced myself, we played the gig, we had a great time, and I packed my car back up, and people said, are you going to be okay? Because they had all driven together. Are you going to be okay? And I said, yeah, I'll be fine. And so I pulled the car out, I start driving, and the road got very dark, very fast. And I noticed there was something weird about the car. It was making a weird noise. And so in the next town, because there was just nothing until I reached a town probably 20, 30 minutes later, again, I'm 3 hours outside of Austin, I get out of the car, I look underneath the car, and there's nothing there. I know you're expecting to see the scary clown face again. He wasn't there either. And so I figured, well, it's just my imagination, and it's not important, which is never a smart thing to do. I got back in the car, I started driving, and I heard this noise again. And I had a choice at this point. Do I turn around, go back to that same town and wait and see what I can find, or do I keep going and just ignore it? After about probably 5 or 10 minutes, that noise had kind of disappeared. And then all of a sudden, the check engine light showed up. It just flashed on. All of a sudden, things started happening. I noticed the steering got kind of sluggish. The lights were coming on the dashboard. Smoke literally started to dim. And for the next probably 60 to 90 seconds, all I saw was my lights. It was almost like they were on a dimmer switch. And what was on the road was nothing. It was one line and all these trees around me, and all I could do was it was sort of like guiding a sinking ship into the depths of the sea. And so I pulled my car off the side of the road. Fortunately, there was a little small road coming off of where I was, so I could pull off and not be in the middle of the road anymore because there was no shoulder. And I stopped the car, and before I even opened the door, I sensed this feeling of panic came over me. It just flashed down my spine. I got out of the car, I opened up the hood, and there was a belt had broken, and it had literally torn into the insulation on the roof of the hood. I looked around. There was nothing. I looked up the road, down the road. Nobody was around. There was miles to anything. And if I went and knocked on somebody's door, they would probably come up to it with a shotgun. And I had no idea what to do. And at that moment, I had realized for the first time in my life, I had a choice, actually. I could either panic and freak out, or I could just stay calm and realize I need to get myself out of this situation. Now, there are people who, and long story short, you obviously know I made it home, and it was from staying calm and realizing I had nothing, I could handle this. I could take care of this. So That's when you're in a situation when fear is starting to take over, you need to realize that's the most important thing that can happen. And this doesn't just happen when you're on a two-lane road at 3 o'clock in the morning when it's pitch black. You could be at work and you could have all these things where you have deadlines, you have people in your little oasis of staying focused and realize I just need to get this done. I can deal with it later. So that's what I call the most important skill you can learn. Now we've been talking about fear, and there's one fear I think you should know about that can be even more powerful than everything we've talked about, and that is the fear of regret. Now, this is a quote from a nurse who had dealt with a lot of patient beds, and this was somebody, she said that the regrets that their patients talked about all the time. The number one regret, more so than any of the other four, people said, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expect. There's fear kind of written in that we're always wanting to please other people. We're always trying to live up to a standard. We're afraid, isolated. We're afraid that other people aren't going to accept us. When I'm here to live the life you're afraid of living. There's a great movie that came out earlier this year called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and that's what it's all about. And so I highly recommend you check that out. So I want to leave you, I know we've gone over time here, but I want to leave you with one last quote. There's a motivational speaker who is in the 70s and 80s. His name is Les Brown, and he has one of my favorite quotes of all time that I have virtually memorized. And I recommend, I'm going to say it for you, I recommend you go listen to him saying it, because the best motivational speakers of all time. He said, imagine, if you will, being on your deathbed. Standing around your bed are the ideas, the dreams, the abilities, and the talents given to you by life. And that for whatever reason, you never acted on those ideas. You never pursued or used those talents. Your leadership, you never used your voice. You never wrote that book. And there they are, standing around your bed, looking at you, these ghosts of all these things that had happened in your life, all your talents, all your abilities, looking at you with large, angry eyes, saying, we came to you, and only you could have given us life. Now, we must die with you forever. The question is, if you die today, what ideas, what dreams, what abilities, what talents, and what gifts would die with you? And so with that, I'm going to ask you again, what are you afraid of? So my name is Benjamin Portnoy, and I'm spending this time with me. I hope you've gotten a lot out of it. I mentioned earlier I have a book that just Amazon if you'd like to learn more about it. You can check it out actually on Amazon. It's available both in hard copy and on Kindle. And if you just want to learn more about the book itself, I have a website for it. It's www.tamingashark.com. You can also learn more about me at www.benjaminportnoy.com. I'm also on Twitter, Portnoy, and I would love to connect with you. So please visit. Please come say hi. Let me know how I can help you. On benjaminportnoy.com, I have a contact form. Feel free. Send me a note. Let me know if you have any thoughts about this presentation or something else that's going on in your life. So thanks for spending the time with me, and I will talk to you soon.